Today is all about running backs. We talk about young studs versus old hammer RBs, price points to go between these players. We talk expiring contracts, cut candidates, ideal landing spots for the 2025 incoming rookies, as well as a brief debrief on the 2024 rookie RB class. Stick around for all that and more. And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. Justin, joined as always by David and JP. We are mourning as a podcast events that have transpired in college football. So I think we're just going to hop in rather than asking everybody how they're doing. Welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. Like I said, we're going to start with RBs. We're going to start talking young studs versus old hammers. Want to thank these two guys here for doing a lot of the work on it. Real quick plug before we get into it. We are approaching 400 subscribers, so we want to celebrate that by offering a roster review that we will be looking to do as a podcast form for one lucky commenter. We're looking for a rebuilder, so comment your rebuild sleeper IDs as well as league IDs. That's that number you find in the URL up top. Preferably, we're looking for one without a trade deadline so we could give more actionable advice. But if there is a trade deadline, we will also be looking to give meta strategy information that will be actionable, how to handle a rookie draft, general timeline we think for a rebuild, how we come up with that process. So more process based than individual trades anyways. So comment below if you would like to be considered for a roster review. Now let's go ahead and hop into these stud RBs we're talking about. We got some young ones, we got some old ones. So we're going to be looking at 8 of the top 10 RBs in points per game, starting out with 4 guys who seem to have found the fountain of youth somehow. Saquon Barkley, 27.8 years, 23.8 fantasy points per game. Joe Mixon, 28.4 years old, 21.2 fantasy points per game. Alvin Kamara, 29.4 years old, 19.6 fantasy points per game. And King Derrick Henry, 30.9 years old, 19.6 fantasy points per game. So, people have been talking about this 26-year-old RB age cliff for a while, and these guys sure are proving it wrong this year. And then we have the young studs, right? Also in the top 10 in points per game. Bijan Robinson, just under 23, 18.9 fantasy points per game. Jahmyr Gibbs, also just under 23, 18.1 points per game. Achan, 23.1, 17.6 points per game. And Kenneth Walker, just over 24 years old, 16.7 points per game. So I guess the first question, are we actively trying to move one of these young studs for an older hammer? One of those guys that we mentioned first, and some assets that are more flexible. Are we trying to move a Bijan or a Gibbs for Saquon plus? And what would we be willing to take as that plus if we are interested in doing it? For reference, Keep Trade Cut has a difference as somewhere around a mid 25 second or a before last night Jerry Judy.
Yeah, probably before last night, Judy. Honestly, not sure how much that should change his value, but especially on Keep Trade Cut, it probably will. No, I'm going to go ahead and say that's not enough for me personally. I mean, what are we talking? 5 points per game almost to get to Saquon from those guys, which is a lot, don't get me wrong, but you're basically getting nothing concrete. Jerry Judy might not have value next year. Mid 25 seconds are going to expect him to be good in the 25 class, but they are a bit of a dart throw, and you're losing 5 years almost, essentially. That's just not enough for me. If I can, maybe get a first back, but tack something on my end to get that first, then I'm a lot more interested. I just want something concrete that I feel confident in to give up that much age. That's quite a drop off there. And those guys are still game breakers. It's not like Bijan and Gibbs can't win you weeks.
Yeah, I think that those price points aren't something I'm super comfortable with. JP, gonna ask you, looking at moving from a Achan to Mixon or Henry. Keep Trades Cut suggests you should be able to get Mixon or Henry and a late 26 first or a player in the range of Terry McLaurin or Tyreek Hill for Achan. Are you willing to take that type of a package for Achan?
Yeah, I mean, if I can get a 26 first or Scary Terry who's producing top 15 wide receiver numbers,
top
and still
5 in total points.
he's top 5 in total points. Wow, yeah, he's been incredible this year. He's been one of the best values in the entire draft. So I would definitely take that package. It's not even a doubt because I mean Mixon, he's averaging almost 4 points per game more, and I mean for Derrick Henry, it's definitely tougher because he's 2.5 years older than Joe Mixon. Actually, he's about to turn 31, which I feel good about at least one more year of Derrick Henry probably. I don't know how much more I feel comfortable with Joe Mixon, I guess, either, but it's just there's like I said, 2.5 years age difference there. But I'm definitely gonna take the package in that scenario because A Chain, he's a guy who's also he's proved to not be the most durable as well. But he's been pretty great. He's been used as a receiver a ton. So in PPR leagues, he's been very valuable. But I would like that package. But if you make that a second, I'm gonna stick with A Chan.
Looking at the exact same range of the package, but let's sub the name Achan for Jahmyr Gibbs or Bijan Robinson. If we go a little bit up the RB pecking order, are you still willing to take that kind of that's a really helpful package for a competing team.
I think then it's a very, very difficult decision there because Gibbs and Bijan, I mean, I think there's the clear cut top two running backs in Dynasty right now, and they're both game changers. So, I mean, I think just with volatility that they're probably scoring similar to Mixon the rest of the season. If I really needed another player, like if it's a start 11 and Scary Terry is going to be a big upgrade over who else I'd be starting there, I might consider that because, yeah, if I can get two hammers essentially in this deal for, it is a top two dynasty running back, I think I could see myself doing that. But in start nine, I don't think that I would. Start 10, it would be 50-50. I'd have to really think on it.
David, just curious on that last question from your standpoint as well.
You know, I know JP was talking about getting Terry in return because we're a competitor in this scenario. If I can get that first, though, just to insulate the value, just to protect myself a little bit, I think I prefer the first. Now, maybe I could do something else with that first and go buy someone. If that's the goal, though, maybe I'll just take McLaurin.
I was going to say maybe the first could buy Terry.
Exactly. Right, it depends on your situation for sure. But when I make a trade like that where I'm trading a young stud for an old hammer, I love to get a draft pick back that I feel can replace whatever I'm getting or giving. In that case, come 2027, whoever you draft with that pick may well be the most valuable piece of that trade. Probably not, because Gibbs and Bijan are still young, but that possibility does exist. It'd be kind of hard to pass on like Mixon in a first for one of these guys. But if it was truly a late 26 first, I don't know if I could quite pull the trigger. If I thought it was a little more random, though, I definitely would be interested.
All right, just wanted to get your perspective as well. Thank you for that. And last kind of question, going tier down from Kenneth Walker, a guy who started off pretty hot, has been burning a little bit less brightly recently. Want to ask quick thoughts on moving from KW3 down to another older guy, Camara. Keep Trade Cut says the difference is an early 25 second or a guy like Kelsey or Debo.
That's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie. I don't think Walker's necessary. I mean, he's probably around his ceiling, or he was after his hot start. I think you can get another year out of Kamara probably with that extension, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. So yeah, you're gonna give me an early 25 second, which I think could be an impactful running back in this year's draft, or a player that I can plug into my lineup and I think will help me. Debo's a little scary just because of his season hasn't been the best, but we know he can win weeks. All it takes is a player or two from him. So I think I would absolutely take the package in this situation. JP, you agree?
I don't mind that, especially because we think the early second in this draft class will have a lot of, at least some very interesting young running backs. So yeah, I think I would go that side.
One more topic I just want to touch on. We already alluded to it earlier, right? Are we sure about this age cliff being situation? We thought that we were going to see a changing of the guard probably this year at the top of the RB rankings with the rookies that came in last year, Brees getting healthy, HN, everything. Like it seemed like it was primed to see young guys taking over the not just the dynasty ranks, but the redraft ranks. And obviously, when we read off those point per game numbers at the top of the show, not the case. So just kind of prognosticating on if these guys can't do it, do we expect the 25 RB class to finally kind of cause that change, as well as maybe a little bit of father time? JP, let's go with you first here.
Yeah, I mean, this 2025 running back class, I honestly think could be one of the best classes we've seen in quite some time. I think it was the 2017 draft class for the running backs was historically good. I can't remember, but we had a draft class about like 8 or 9 years ago that was really, really good. I think this class could be pretty comparable to that year as well. So I do think that really is going to shift the running back landscape a ton. With the older running backs, with the way they've been performing, I mean, the top four running backs in points per game, they were all 27.8 years old or older, with Saquon being the youngest of the group. Just looking back historically, in 2020, not one running back over the age of 28 years old over 17 points per game. 2021, zero as well. 2022, we had one guy over the age of 28 over 17 points per game. That's Derrick Henry. 2023, last year, we had two in Kamara and Mostert. Now this year, we have three over 17 points per game, and actually, all three of them are over 19 points per game. So they're all just having incredible seasons. Also, Saquon nearly made the list, four guys instead of three, but I mean his birthday's on the day of the Super Bowl actually, so he's close to that cutoff, but not quite in it. But we've seen some guys, they fall off the cliff faster than others, like Leonard Fournette and Eckler. They seem like they really dropped in production very fast. James Conner, Aaron Jones on the other end, they've been more slow decline players. They're still useful, so it's hard to say how these guys are going to age. But I just think a big part of it is that these guys are just incredible running backs. And CMC, he probably would be in this group too if he was healthy, honestly. So I do think that there's a good chance that maybe half of these guys do start to see some sort of major decline, or maybe they hit a wall. Maybe one of them does. I think it's pretty risky because of what we've seen historically. So it does scare me a little bit. I mean, Saquon, I definitely feel good about him still, but some of the other guys like CMC and the other three guys, I do feel a little unsure of just from what we've seen historically with the production at that age.
I was watching right before our recording here the Dynasty Trade in 5 live stream where they asked, like, what's your confidence level that some of these guys are going to be, able to produce at a top 10 level again next year? And I can't say that I feel that much more confident about Kenneth Walker than I do about Derrick Henry or Alvin Kamara being top 10 guys. It is really crazy what we're seeing here. It's kind of changing the way we have to think about valuations of running backs a little bit as just a shorter term window than I think we kind of thought about before. David, do you kind of agree this is changing your thought process at RBs, or were you already smarter than me and ahead of the curve?
I don't know if I've ever been smarter than you, Justin. No, look, JP, you're right. It was the 2017 class. I just looked that up. That class has kind of been unprecedented in how they've approached this age cliff that we thought about. A couple other guys from classes a little before, a little after, but when it's unprecedented like this, it's hard to use data to guide your process. I'm definitely going to look into it in the off season, and certainly with this elite group of players that are getting older, I think with some of them, I'm just going to ride them till the wheels fall off. Like I traded Kamara for a second in a league. Process definitely says you do that move over and over again. It's not going to be a terrible move, but well, here we are 9 months later, whatever, since I made that trade, and boy, I sure wish I had Kamara. Yeah, I don't know. I think with these elite guys, at least, I'm gonna have to rethink how I handle older running backs. But I still think guys like James Conner, Aaron Jones, even though they're performing into old age, I'm probably trying to get out from them for something younger. It's something I'm gonna look into in the offseason because this is definitely new to us. I also think the NFL trending more towards a running game again. I mean, passing numbers are down, running numbers are up. I think that has a lot to do with it. So definitely a lot to reflect on from the running back position from this year in the offseason. I definitely look forward to doing that.
Yeah, and these running backs are incredible, and it definitely has shifted my thoughts for sure.
And moving on to some new running back related topics, we're going to first take a look at guys who have new extensions and talk about what we think about them. Gonna go one at a time and just ask you guys about them briefly. We already touched a little bit on Elvin Kamara. I'm gonna have you just give me a brief summary on your thoughts on him, David. You've already touched on it a little bit, so just go ahead, and it's a 2-year extension that locks him up for at least 2025.
Yeah, it's good for Kamara and his fantasy managers and Dynasty. Owned by the Saints, if you ask me. They just don't have money to be doing that, but there they are spending it. Like, I think at least one more season of Kamara being a PPR king. I'm happy for that on the teams where I have him. I also think that there should be an opportunity to draft someone to take off some of that load, and he may end up with some flex value, whoever that player may be. But yeah, definitely good for Kamara. And just kind of keeps the Saints locked up in their flexibility. So I just don't see a way they replace him in the next year, probably even two.
Yeah, love that for his value. So we expect more of approximately the same. Wouldn't be surprised if it's a fantasy point or two less a game next year, but unless he gets injured, I think you're right about the PPR value. James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals signed a 2-year extension. Not sure of the details at this point. We can safely assume he is locked in for the 25 season. Unsure if the Cardinals will be able to move on after that season if they need to create cap space. JP, what's your immediate reactions to this? I think we talked about this a couple weeks ago and actually predicted this as a reasonable possibility as well.
Yeah, he was going to be a free agent after this season, so they were just getting out ahead of it. I don't know the guaranteed money situation, but it locks him in essentially for 2025. Yeah, definitely muddies some things for Trey Benson, who we have not really seen started to step up the way that we had hoped as the season progresses. So yeah, I mean, I think James Conner is just going to be similar to what he was this year, next year as well, as kind of as a RB2 option. Might be a mid to low end RB2, but the guy still looks pretty good.
Yeah, he can ball for sure. No reason to think it will change. Health, of course, being the only possible concern.
Yeah, he's healthy for the time, like all year.
Yeah, healthiest season I ever have seen him play. It is good for him. Glad he got paid one more time. Moving on to one of my Detroit Lions, David Montgomery, 2-year extension that locks him up for at least 2025 as well. Never know what they'll be willing to do to move on for cap reasons after that point, but wouldn't be surprised to see him stick around beyond that as well. What does this mean for his dynasty value for you, David?
For Montgomery specifically, it's excellent. He's a terrific fit there. They love him there. They feed him the rock over one of the most efficient running backs in the league. Go ahead, Justin.
More importantly, does not share code words with the internet.
You know, that's pretty important. I also do think this is really impactful for several fantasy players. I mean, we love the Lions offense, and keeping Montgomery there means they're going to continue to be run first like they have been. I think, well, I'm going to say it does technically limit Gibbs' ceiling. The limited ceiling Gibbs has shown is elite. If Montgomery wasn't there, though, Gibbs would probably be Dynasty RB1, like unanimously, I would assume. You know, with Montgomery there, with Gibbs there, I think it probably also limits Laporta's ceiling. Amon-Ra's still going to eat like he does, but I think Jameson Williams probably we're seeing what Jameson Williams is going to be long term, which is great in best ball and someone you're okay plugging in for a bye week filler, injury filler as a guy that can blow up, but not a regular starter. So I think Montgomery's extension kind of locks most of the pieces in that offense into their role for at least a couple years.
And the most confusing one and most disappointing one for the Jonathan Brooks enthusiasts in the room. I'm okay. I'm doing okay over here, guys. Chuba Hubbard, 4-year extension that locks him in for at least 2025 before they'd be able to feasibly consider moving on from him from a cap standpoint.
Yeah, no, this was very disappointing for Jonathan Brooks owners, and we haven't gotten a chance to talk about it yet. But definitely is a hurdle now for Jonathan Brooks to take over the backfield. He still could, but it's a 4-year extension. He's getting about $8 million per year, and there's 15 million guaranteed. So the math would say that the first 2 years would be guaranteed essentially. So they might keep him around for 2025 next year and 2026. So that really pushes out what we could see from Jonathan Brooks to maybe be a full time workhorse to 2026 potentially, but he could pull a Bucky Irving, and kind of dethrone the guy ahead of him. I mean, we see it from younger running backs fairly often, but I do think Chuba Hubbard has been pretty good. I mean, he has the sixth most rushing yards in the league right now. He's averaging almost 5 yards per carry. I mean, he does look like an efficient running back that keeps the offense on schedule, keeps them out of those third and long situations. So good for Chuba, but not good for Jonathan Brooks. I mean, do you guys think Jonathan Brooks is even a top 15 dynasty running back anymore? He's probably outside of that for me now.
I'd have to relook at the rankings, but I think I'd still have him top 15.
Yeah, I think he's a decent buy at this point. I would be very happy to transition a mid 25 second if you can do that for him, as long as it doesn't look like it's going to be 201, 202. I think that 201, 202, the flexibility, I'd rather have it. I think we saw last week he got the passing down work. We didn't see Hubbard get any receptions. he was still out touched a little bit. I believe it was 6 carries compared to 13 for Hubbard, but they're working him in. I'm still hopeful. Maybe it's just that I need to be for my like 3 or 4 shares of Brooks that I have in Dynasty, but he was just a guy, and we've seen over and over again just a guys who get a lot of opportunity, being able to do a lot. Of course, they did financially commit to him on some level, but I think that financial commitment is more what David was talking about, them showing, a nod that the NFL is going towards a running game and that having multiple guys in that running game is better for your team, right? The Lions are doing it so successfully. The Steelers this year have been pretty successful running out 2 guys. We see the Commanders running out up until Eckler got injured, multiple guys in different roles. And I do think it's not a bad idea to be able to try to have offensive skill players around your young quarterback. I want to believe.
I'm definitely gonna take Bucky Irving over him at this point.
Yeah.
I'm seeing on Keep Trade Cut, Jonathan Brooks is RB 18 right now. He's behind Brian Robinson, which I'd probably have him ahead of Brian Robinson still. But then Pacheco and David Montgomery, I think that's a good line.
I'd take Monty easily over him at this point. I think that Robinson, am I competing this year? If I am, I'd probably be willing to make the switch if it was all I could do with Brooks and I needed a running back, right? Say I just had CMC go down or something like that. I think that's a fair value proposition, contender versus rebuild, but I might prefer Robinson either way, to be honest with you.
I'm gonna take Brooks there. I mean, maybe if I'm competing, I'll take Monty. But look, we knew this was gonna be a rough year for him. Let's look back to last year. We knew last year JSN was gonna have a rough year. Everybody jumped off the bandwagon, and now here we are a year later. JSN's a top 10 wide receiver on the season. This guy's talented. Brooks is good. We saw some glimpses of that last week. Even I know it sucks that Chuba got extended, but it's not like we don't need 2 running backs in today's NFL. It's not like they can't have 2 successful running backs if the offense takes a step forward. Big if there for that team specifically. But I do think Brooks is the better running back there. I do expect him to take the lead role. I, you know, I'm willing to buy him at that price, especially. I think next year's going to be looking up for him.
Yeah, I mean, so the closest pick values it shows late 2026 first, random 2027 first. You're probably not paying that though, right?
Probably not, just because I don't like to lose my flexibility in the future. Probably more so careful of that than most managers. But I think teams trying to compete in 2025 would be willing to consider a late 26 first for him.
Yeah, I think around RB 18 ish is probably about fair because I mean the hope was that he could be a guy like the 70% snap share kind of a guy, really putting up top 8 ish numbers, which I mean maybe he could still do. I don't know. Maybe Bryce Young is taking a step. I kind of still don't think that they're going to be an above average offense, but maybe they can get to average and be run heavy, and he could be. But what is he then an RB 2 ish, which for a 21-year-old running back, it's not too bad. And I think that RB 18 is probably about fair.
Moving on to looking at guys who might be switching teams next year, either restricted or unrestricted free agencies. Real quick explanation of restricted free agent, just the team has the ability to tender the player for a certain dollar amount that's calculated by the league. So if they want them back, the player is unable to leave. The 2 restricted free agents are Jordan Mason and Jalen Warren. I guess there's also a kind of restricted free agent where they have the ability to match the deal. I'm not sure which kind those 2 guys are, but they could definitely be back if the team wants them.
I'm pretty sure it depends on the level of tender you offer. So, like, you could offer a tender where it's the lowest tender where you don't get anything in return, but you could still match. And I think you could do a second round and a first round where you get that pick in return. But those are a lot higher often, and I wouldn't imagine Mason or Warren, are going to get a tender that high. And I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how it works.
And unrestricted free agents, we have a handful, and some of these guys have been very fantasy relevant even this year. Najee Harris, Aaron Jones, Nick Chubbs, Javante Williams, J.K. Dobbins, Rico Dowdle, Alexander Madison, and for what it's worth, Amir Abdullah, all unrestricted free agents that we've seen at least some relevance this year from. Of course, no Saquon or King Henry changing teams and changing the league, but the potential for some decent fantasy production. Who is the most likely player on that list to make an impact on a new team or potentially the same team, but just to make impact next year, David?
Ooh, changing the question on me. If it's with the same team potentially, I think I'm gonna go Dobbins. I do expect him to resign. I think he looked good enough there. I think that team has enough other holes. I think they'll add to the backfield still. But if he resigns there, I think he's the lead guy again. I think he's an RB2 again as long as he's healthy. But yeah, nobody's super exciting on this list for sure.
And let me ask you, who is most likely to do so on a new team then?
I'm gonna go Aaron Jones on changing team. I just, the Packer in me hopes that he's seen enough of the Vikings to want to move on. I also think that they could go younger. He could definitely be back there, but I still think he has a little tread on the tires. So wherever he ends up, I do have some interest for one more year with him. Najee was the other guy I was considering, but he's just not that good.
Yeah, I mean, Najee would be top of the list for me. He doesn't have the injury stuff like Dobbins. He's much younger than Aaron Jones. And I just I was looking at his stats, and the guy's had at least 270 touches every single year, and he's never missed a game through 4 years. Kind of crazy. I don't know why they didn't take his fifth year option. Honestly, I think they probably wished that they did because I think he's been pretty solid. I just think that with the size he has, and I think he's good enough to where teams they want to give him the rock. When you're getting touches as much as he is, as long as you're not in a terrible offense, I mean, you're going to be like a top 20 running back probably, and upside to go even higher if you're getting touchdowns.
I am a little bit higher on him as well than David. I think he's interesting between some combination of age, injury history. He's the one that I think is the safest bet. But I will say, I think Aaron Jones and Dobbins have a higher ceiling. Do you kind of agree with that, David?
Look, if he goes to like Dallas or something and he's the guy there, of course he's going to be exciting for us for fantasy just because the opportunity is still there. I've just never thought he was more than his opportunity. Like he never exceeded the opportunities he was given, if that makes sense. So, when he changes teams, there's just a lot more uncertainty there. I do agree, though, he hasn't had the injury history and that, 270 plus touches without missing a game in his career is really impressive. I'm not out on him. I didn't choose him there.
Yeah, and I know he's not very explosive. He hasn't had a double-digit rushing touchdown season, but I mean, we saw that rookie year. If you have a quarterback that's really willing to check it down, I mean, he had 74 receptions that year, and he PPR'd his way to being an RB3 that year. I mean, I know his rookie year. That was a while ago, but at least with what I think he can do as a goal line guy and a pass catcher, I think the upside is kind of there, even though it doesn't seem like it for a guy that boring. But I think if you give him a good situation with a quarterback that checks it down, I think he could be a top 10 guy, honestly.
All right. And of course, any of those guys, if there's a buy window you feel like is a good deal, they all have the possibility to increase in value either with a new contract, besides probably Madison and Abdullah. I mean, if Madison resigns, he could definitely increase in value because I couldn't get a third for him in some leagues.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I put those two in there mostly to highlight how open the Vegas backfield is going into next year.
Moving on to some cut candidates this offseason. Some guys that could be cut, although very unlikely. Derrick Henry would save the Ravens 6 or 7 million, depending on timing. Gonna say that's probably a no still. Eckler save roughly 3.5 million. He's been used a lot, but could see it happen. Mostert 3 million they could save. That wouldn't surprise me. Zach Moss 3.5 million wouldn't surprise. Gus Bus saves roughly 3 million, and Miles Sanders saves 4 or 5 million depending on the timing. Are there any of these guys that you believe could get second life somewhere else at this point? I think based on age, Zach Moss and Miles Sanders would be the most interesting if you could get them for truly throw in value at this point. Or do you think that this is all mostly kind of useless information at this point?
I do think that Eckler is a guy that could step up. He has a situation where the quarterback doesn't run a lot. I think that's part of it with Jaden Daniels and sharing the backfield. But I think if he got more volume in the passing offense wherever he goes, he's also a guy that's a flex with benefits. The RB that he's sharing the backfield with. I mean, maybe he could be a top 12 running back for a stretch with what we've seen as from a goal line perspective from him, the ability that he has there as well as the pass catching. So he might be the guy that if I can get him pretty cheap, I might be willing to take a swing on him.
Can I take the low hanging fruit? He is technically in that segment you mentioned him. So I'm gonna go Derrick Henry. I don't expect them to cut him, but he clearly is the best guy on this list if they were all to magically get cut. I think Zach Moss is probably the most likely for me to come in and be, a nice handcuff to someone or a change of pace guy early down work. Still maybe have some flex appeal depending on who he's paired with. But yeah, I mean, this isn't the most exciting list. I think more what it speaks to is opportunity opening up on those teams. I think that's really the lesson to take from this group personally.
All right, all right, all right. And so to wrap up this RB segment before we get to 2024 class debrief, just want to look at some of the best landing spots for some 2025 rookies right off the back here. Going to start with the one everyone's most excited about, Ashton Genty. JP, start us off with who you think or where you want him to land. Pick the one everybody sees coming.
I think that the best opportunity for a running back would be with the Dallas Cowboys. And we saw what Zeke did for years. Even guy right before him, and DeMarco Murray was super productive workhorse guy. And just looking at what Dallas offense has been prior to this year, I mean, Dak Prescott, he got hurt this year. CD started slow. The offense wasn't quite what we're used to. But back in 2021, they had the highest scoring offense in the entire league. They were third highest scoring in 2022. And last year, they were fourth. So top five for multiple years. And I think that's mostly due to how good Dak Prescott is at quarterback. I personally think he's underrated. And also, Dak Prescott, he's not really a guy that's running a lot. He used to when he was a little younger, but especially now coming off this injury and him getting older, I could see him checking down the running back a lot. He's already done it with Dowdle, Zeke. He could do it even more with a guy as talented as Ashton Genty. So yeah, if he could go there, it'd be a good offense, catching passes, and he is a clear guy who could be a workhorse there because there's nobody who would really be stealing touches. Even if they brought back Dowdle, they're not going to really be playing Dowdle a whole lot in that situation.
And David, where is your ideal landing spot?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with the Denver Broncos here. While they do grade out better as a pass blocking unit, going into last week's games, they had PFF's second highest overall offensive line grade. Pretty good line there. He has a very clear path to a three down roll there. Javante's a free agent, as we just talked about. Will McLaughlin has looked good, but probably can't carry the load as the main guy. Estimate maybe he's the early down guy, and McLaughlin's the pass catching guy. If they go into the season like that, we'll still be a little excited about them. But if they add a guy like Janty, he's better than both of those guys at everything they do. So look, that coupled with the fact that in all offseason, you heard us talk about how excited we were about Peyton's offense, how we thought these running backs were buy low opportunities. Didn't really play out this year. But that doesn't change the fact that Sean Payton knows how to get the best out of his running backs for fantasy. You give him a guy like Ashton Janty, and I mean, he could be, top five running back next year. That's what I'm going to pick. I think the Broncos, I don't know if they'll spend that first round pick on him, but it'd be really fun.
Would be fun to see for sure. And next, I want you to both name a player that you think is going to get potentially day two draft capital. So round two, round three draft capital, and a landing spot you would love to see for that player.
I mean, this one was tough. I'll be honest. I think it's a good question, but we've got a lot of coaching changes that are probably going to happen, which changes schemes, and I'm not really great at picking schematic fits in general. Still something I need to work on, but I do think this fit makes a lot of sense. Same team that JP picked for Janty. Marion Hampton going to Dallas would be a lot of fun. As JP talked about, they love to run the ball there in Dallas, and they just don't have the guy to do it right now. I think they have the lowest yards per carry in the NFL. But also, as JP talked about, they like to throw it to him. They were 10th or ninth, maybe in targets to their running back, even with unskilled running backs. Hampton has 2 seasons over 250 carries, 1,500 yards, and at least 15 touchdowns. This year's 38 catches on 43 targets, 327 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1.37 yards per route run. So, I think he has a three down role in him if given the opportunity. He's also pretty explosive in that offense, lacks explosivity among running backs with 100 plus carries. Hampton, third in 10 plus yard carries, ninth in missed tackles forced, ninth in yards after contact per attempt, fourth in first downs. So I mean, he's not going to fix every problem they have on that offense, but if he goes there, he's got a real shot to kind of like JT be a real RB1 kind of guy this coming year, in my opinion.
And out of those statistics you listed, David, off the top of your head, how many of those do you think Genty leads the country in as opposed to Hampton here?
It's all of them. He's first in all of them for sure, probably by a margin too. I'd have to double check on how wide, but he's first in all those.
I know for missed tackles forced, definitely missed tackles forced and 10 plus yard carries by a mile.
I think he has more yards after contact than any other back has rushing yards now.
PFF grade, he's like one of the highest in their database ever.
I
their
think it
review,
is the
so
highest
crazy.
ever if it finishes like that. Yeah, JT is impressive.
Yeah, but definitely interested in Hampton too. Would love that landing spot for him. JP, do you have a guy for us?
Yeah, how about we take Travion Henderson and keep him in Ohio with the Cincinnati Bengals there? I personally would really like that because I like his skill set as a pass catcher. I don't think that this guy has to be a guy that gets 300 plus touches on the ground, especially if you're in a great offense like that. If he gets goal line, I mean, we've seen what Chase Brown is doing there right now. I think Travion Henderson is much better. He knows how to play in the cold there up in Ohio. But no, I think Joe Burrow, with the way that he's not super mobile typically, he would like to check it down a lot. And I just think that he would definitely get the goal line stuff over Chase Brown at this point. So I would like that. I think he could be top 10 running back for sure in that offense.
You're watching on YouTube and you saw my face. It's not because I disagree with the take. It's I just wouldn't like it for my Chase Brown shares.
I almost went to Cincinnati for similar logic, but a slightly different direction. I feel like Travion's skill set is Chase Brown, but on steroids, kind of, right? He can do a lot of things Chase Brown does, but he's better at it. So I almost went with Quinshot Judkins because I think Judkins and Henderson have been a pretty good pair at Ohio State. So pairing Judkins with a slightly less version of Henderson, but still similar ways that he could take the load off could have been interesting. But I think either of those guys in Cincinnati, or really any of these day two guys that we're going to talk about in Cincinnati, could be a lot of fun.
Yeah, when you're thinking complimentary like that, that does make sense. But I mean, you've said he's amazing as a blocker, and he might need a little help.
Oh yeah, definitely.
All right, and last question. Thinking along the molds of Zach Charbonnet or Trey Benson, a guy getting drafted day two who we think might have to sit a year or two behind a team. What are some landing spots that we think are maybe could like actually, really like lower the value of a running back in the short term, but we think could be a place to grow? David, start me off with one. Maybe with an incumbent running back who started off his career kind of this way.
Yeah, actually, he sure did. I think I picked the Ravens. There's a lot of teams that I think could fit this bill, but I picked the Ravens. I think it makes sense to get Henry's replacement in. Justice Hill he's fine for what he does, but he's not really. You don't need much behind Henry, but he's getting older. If Henry goes down, Justice Hill can't do what Derrick Henry does. They draft a guy like Caleb Johnson or Marion Hampton if they happen to be there in the second round when they get on the clock. Kind of doubt they fall to him in the second, but if they take one of these guys, they're not going to do much next year, probably unless Henry gets hurt. Long term, though, it could be a great fit and a lot of fun. It's just going to tank their value for year one.
Yeah, I mean, with how stacked the class is, I mean, maybe there's a chance that teams wait on running back a little bit, and you could see a scenario like that. The team that I'm going to go with is the San Francisco 49ers. And we've seen Kyle Shanahan, what he does with running backs. He always has them performing. Always. I mean, when you get a guy that's very good, it's a guy that can be the RB1 by 4 or 5 points per game on a season, like we've seen from Christian McCaffrey. If you get a good running back in that scenario, yeah, the first year they're going to be behind CMC. So they're probably not going to be round one rookie picks, maybe near the back end. But yeah, you could probably get them discounted. And then if you're a rebuilder, hold them for a year or so, and maybe they'll send it in that second or third year.
Yeah, I almost went with San Francisco too. I think, especially with all those injuries we just saw pop up, a guy like Nick Singleton would be interesting there. He's got the receiving chops. He's obviously not Christian McCaffrey, but he can do it all to some degree. I think he'd be a lot of fun there personally.
Like that call for sure. Moving on to our 2024 rookie debrief real quick. Before we end the show, I want to take a minute to talk about, or maybe just like grieve. There's a couple bright spots for sure, but the guys that we drafted early on have not done a lot yet. We already touched on the Hubbard Brooks, so looks like a timeshare. Not going to touch too much more on that. The Connor extension, we didn't talk about how much that means for Benson yet, but outside of Irving and Tyrone Tracy, we haven't seen any real year one ROI, although there's a couple people who flashed in spots. Do either of you have a positive spin on why I should be higher on this class? or is this just kind of a little bit more disappointing year so that we could be a little hungrier for next year?
I think every year we talk about how this next rookie class is going to be like the best it's ever been. And even at receiver, I mean, the top end guys at receiver definitely hit, but, looking at that second round, which we thought was going to be kind of strong, you've got a lot of misses there. Running back, you've got a lot of misses, or at the very least, people you're going to have to hold on to a year longer than you would like before production comes in. It's a tough year for running back. I don't really have a great spin on it. I do think we kind of already talked about this guy a lot, but a guy that I'm willing to buy, it seems, for a little bit higher of a price than you two is Jonathan Brooks. I still think he has that potential to be the lead guy from this group. A year from now, we might be talking about how people got a really good deal on him in the offseason, kind of like Jason, which I talked about earlier in the episode. So, yeah, if I can get Brooks for, a second or a second and some throwing pieces, I'm all about that. If we're talking about a first, I might want something back, but I'm still in on him. I still think he's going to do what we thought he would do. So overall, the class kind of sucks, but I do like Jonathan Brooks still.
I don't know that my price is really much different on Brooks. I wouldn't do 201, 202, but anything lower probably would be open to it. But I'm not very excited about this class looking back on it. I mean, we had hope for Benson, we had hope for Braylon Allen, Blake Corum, a lot of the guys pre-draft. Kind of went to spots that weren't that great, and they also haven't really stepped up like a guy like Jalen Wright. I'm looking at how many touches he's got on the year, and it's not very many. And when he has gotten touches, it hasn't been very effective. So, he's had some opportunities. We've seen Mostert and Achan be good in that backfield last year. There's been some injuries between Achan and Mostert, and he hasn't really stepped up. So my belief in him is a lot lower, just like it is with Trey Benson. There's some guys like Ray Davis who I think are pretty good too, but he's also stuck right behind another good young running back that's locked in for a couple of years, more of a higher end handcuff. So it makes me even more excited for this class that we really, really like for the running backs in 2025. But yeah, I'm pretty disappointed overall outside of the two guys that you said, Justin and Bucky and Tyrone Tracy, with maybe some hope for Brooks still.
I do think it is worthwhile mentioning a couple other moves that I'd be very happy to make during the rookie draft season. We're going to get into rookie draft mania, and I want to try to bring this back up then, where people are trying to get into the third round pick. They have a guy, it's a wide receiver or it's a running back in a nebulous room that we don't really love the running back, but maybe there's a little bit of opportunity, or maybe we like the running back, but there's not really any opportunity. And there are two other guys I'd love to try to target in that range, and that would just be Braylon Allen and Ray Davis, as just guys that we've seen what they can do. They're not anything more than a handcuff RB, but I happily think that they're worth a third because of the upside that they have when they are healthy. I don't think either of the teams is looking to do much more with their running back rooms next year during the draft. Maybe they could surprise us, but those are two other guys. Like, I love what I've seen from them in spots of competency at the NFL level. So just a little more insight. Any other things you guys want to talk about regarding this 2024 class?
I mean, kind of on that third round handcuff note, I think third round. I mean, a third round pick's pretty good value for a handcuff you're confident in. So I do think guys like Blake Corum, maybe even Marshawn Lloyd, who we didn't get to see this much because of injury, but when he was out there in very limited opportunity, he did look explosive. I think some guys like that I'd be willing to pay a third for.
And are you sending 302 for any of these guys, you think?
For the guys I've seen it in, like that I named, I absolutely would, because I've seen that they can pretty much do better than what I expect anybody at the 302 to be able to do. Sure, I could hit on the 302. I could get the next Puka Nakua at the 302, whatever, right? But third round of any draft class, I'm probably hammering backup RBs. So give me a backup RB that I've seen can do it at the NFL level. For that reason, like Corum for an early third, I'm not sure, but for a mid third, 305, 306, once we're getting into like a 301, 302, even though it's probably, I shouldn't view it that different than the 305, 306 if I'm making the pick, it is a lot different in the trade market, right? This is the 301. This is just practically a second when you're talking to someone, right? So, like, for that reason, I'm not using that for a guy that I haven't seen anything from. So I'd lump Lloyd into that same bucket kind of too, for better or for worse. That later third, I might consider it, but 301, 302, no.
I think that's fair.
All right. If you've stuck with us all of this long, thank you so much. Please, if you haven't and you have a team that needs to be rebuilding or you want to evaluate, Don't forget, if you drop that sleeper ID league number in the comments below, we will put you in our entry to potentially get a roster review that we'll do as an episode, give you some theory based rebuilding advice. So, would love to hear from all of y'all if you're still with us. From all of us here at the Data Construction Podcast, thank you for joining us for another episode. We hope you found this as helpful for you as it was for us. Please remember again to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here, until next time.